Hi, my name is Brandon, and I'm an alcoholic and addict in recovery. When I first stopped drinking, I did so without any kind of formal recovery program. I had an online group that I was somewhat involved in. I was trying to go to some non-12-step meetings, but I didn't really make much of a habit of it. And in general, I just relied on pot to help me deal with any cravings and that kind of thing. Wasn't really a great recipe for recovery. But I was really against the 12 steps. I had heard bad things about the level of effectiveness that they had. I'd also heard bad things about the extreme way that they approached the involvement of God and Christianity in the healing process for people. And I didn't want any part of that. And so when I finally did enter into formal recovery about 3 years later, and I discovered that the 12 steps were very different in reality from what I had perceived them to be, I was relieved, because in the 12 steps I found a place where, even though I didn't agree with everybody who was in the meetings that I was attending, I could still find in the 12 steps a way to move forward in recovery that I couldn't do otherwise. One of the reasons that I picked up Recovery 2.0 by Tommy Rosen is that he found the same thing. And he recognizes that there are some potential problems with the 12 steps, and that there are extreme views of the 12 steps and how they should be regarded and applied to life. But he finds value in them as a way of applying spiritual growth to those in recovery who need that in order to stay sober and in order to move forward with their lives. I want to read a couple of paragraphs from his book. And I want to start with one that highlights the importance of being cautious about who you listen to when they're describing the 12 steps, because there are, as in every group, there are extremists in 12-step groups, and they don't necessarily represent the way all of us practice the 12 steps. He says, usually you hear from one of two camps about the 12 steps. In one group, you have the people who cannot entertain a conversation where the 12 steps and the fellowship that surrounded them are brought under scrutiny. If you suggest that the 12 steps can be improved upon, they see this as nothing short of blasphemy. These are the fundamentalist attendees of 12-step programs. Their experience with the steps and fellowship has been profoundly positive, yet they have latched onto the program with the hooks of dogma, and it has caused them to shut their minds to any discourse that calls for an investigation into an evolution of the process that saved them. They take an extreme position. However, among the ranks of 12-step fellowship, you have every possible perspective about the 12 steps. It would be incorrect to conclude that all the voices inside 12-step programs are extreme. Unfortunately, extreme voices are often the ones that are heard the most. In the other camp, you have a different kind of extremism. Folks who argue against the efficacy of the 12 steps for a variety of reasons. Some of them feel that the 12 steps let them down because their loved ones have not been able to heal from their disease. Others may have had negative experiences with members of a 12-step fellowship that severely colored their opinions. Still, others may have had no interactions with the 12 steps, but citing the relatively low success rates of 12-step programs, they get upset and decide to pick apart something they do not fully understand. So when I was looking into recovery, my background, I had been in school for psychology about 20 years beforehand. We had a section on addiction, and we talked a lot about why the science doesn't show a lot of success rates in 12-step programs, even though they're the most popular programs. And the reason that we were looking at this is that there's also not a lot of, at least at that time, which was a little over 2 decades ago, there wasn't a lot of effort being put into looking into other alternatives. It was like 12 steps or nothing. And so it was leaving a lot of people feeling like they didn't have any options. And there was not a lot of scientific work going on looking at why there weren't the success rates that we hoped. Some of that's changed. And there certainly are a lot of other options out there for people. But it resulted in kind of, in myself, this idea that the 12 steps were bad. It was just bad news. It was all based on Christianity. And if you weren't a Christian and weren't willing to accept Jesus into your heart, then you couldn't participate. And I thought that was really bad because I was also at the time kind of anti-religious in general, and I didn't really care for it. And so fast forward 20 years, when I actually needed some kind of program of recovery, I still held on to those beliefs. And it took a lot of different people sharing a lot of different information with me for me to start to understand that what I had been getting was just a one-sided perspective of the 12 steps. And I needed to open my mind a little bit and first and foremost talk to a lot of different people about their experience with the program before I started making my own judgments. So I did that. And I actually took time to read through the book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And there were 2 things that I noticed first and foremost about this book. One, I loved the way it was written because I could identify so much with so much of what was being described. I read on those pages about what these people had gone through, and I thought, this is me. And they described all the spiritual afflictions that people who are in addiction go through, the selfishness, the fear, the pride, the ego. And I was like, this is me. They know who I am. So I felt like I had found people who understood me when in my addiction, I felt so alone and isolated. So I loved that part of it. But I also found things that I didn't agree with. The way that they said certain things didn't make a lot of sense to me. Some of the very categorical things that they said, I didn't quite agree with. And so instead of just putting the book down and saying, well, I'm not going to mess with it, I started talking to more people about it and getting other opinions about it and finding out that some of the things, the way I read them, other people interpret them in a different way. And what I soon found was that there were people, a lot of people, working 12-step programs who worked them with an individual flavor and flair. And I started to, I started to see that I was wrong about the level of Christianity in the 12 steps. In fact, there is never a mention of Jesus or Christ in the entire AA book. While there are mentions of God, if you read and if you look at the story of how the 12 steps were constructed, there were atheists and agnostics involved in creating the text of the 12 of the big book of AA. And God was chosen as a word that a lot of people could identify with, but the emphasis is on finding a power greater than yourself. Well, once someone explained that to me, I could get behind that because it made sense to me that I needed to stop thinking of myself as the center of the universe and start thinking about other things as being more important than me and being higher than I was. And so once some of these things started clicking, I realized, well, maybe I've been a little bit misled about the 12 steps. And as I started to learn more about them, I started to realize that just like any other organization, there are different, for lack of a better word, different factions. There are people who are very extreme in their beliefs who think of the book of Alcoholics Anonymous as kind of a Bible that was divinely inspired, as one of my friends has put it at one point, and that you need to read it very literally, and that there's no room for interpretation. And there's other people who feel that there is room for interpretation. And at the end of the day, I'm not here to say which one is right or which one is wrong. What I am here to say is that once I started to open up my own mind and started to find the people within this organization that were saying things that made sense to me and that were seemed to be wanting to help me find my own way by using the 12 steps. And once I started to work with those people, a lot of good stuff started to happen. That good stuff is what Tommy Rosen is going to explore more in this book. And I'm going to follow along, give my own experience with the 12 steps, and talk about both the good and the bad, and the places where I really have felt that the 12 steps have been an extreme help, and also the places where I don't quite agree with other people about their interpretations of it. Because I do think that we have to look at the overall concept of the 12 steps, which is it's a formula for self-improvement, is the way that I see it. Some people might disagree with me, but by looking at it that way, it allows me to interact with it in a way that I can constantly iterate that formula. I can constantly look at different ways of doing things, and I can constantly keep an open mind to other people's ideas and incorporate those ideas to continue making things better and better. It's a great system, in my opinion, but I had to give it a chance, and I had to find the right people in order to help me understand it. So that's it for today. More to come on that tomorrow. In the meantime, have a good one.